Hello again. Today I want to demonstrate to you why, if you want to help your children with their mathematics, you should abandon all imperial units, or medieval units as I prefer to call them. And by imperial units, of course, I'm referring to yards, feet, inches, stones, pounds and ounces, miles wherever possible, although road signs are a tricky one there, of course, acres, and if you're still using Fahrenheit degrees, those too. Just get rid of the whole lot out of your life and use entirely metric units, and that includes your own height and weight as well. Now believe me, I understand fully, having studied this for some 40 to 45 years, what a controversial subject this is, and I've heard just about every excuse under the sun as to why we should keep our imperial units, our medieval units, why we should not bother changing the road signs and so on. But the point is here, I strongly believe that the continued use of these imperial units is dragging our children down in their maths, their science and their technology education, and even to some extent in subjects like geography, where children are involved in reading scales on maps. Now, having heard all those excuses, I could tell you that none of them is more important than the education of the 700,000 youngsters that we send out into the adult world from school every year. Now, I have spent so much time on this that I've actually produced a website and a document showing all the problems that our children have that children in other countries do not. And if you want to find out more about this, please visit my website at www.drmetric.com. Now, I have found that there's a strong belief amongst quite a number of members of the UK population that teaching both sets of units, imperial and metric, actually helps our children's mathematics. Well, if that were the case, our children would be going higher and higher. We'd be right at the top of the international tables, wouldn't we? As it is, we're slowly sinking and sinking. And we just cannot go on like this. It is a ridiculous situation. Now, one thing that our youngsters are supposed to be able to do today is to convert from imperial to metric and vice versa. But I have actually done a study on this with some A-level maths students, some of the best maths students in our county. And I've asked them questions such as, if I buy a summer house, let's say, and it's 11 feet by 6, how many square metres of laminated flooring would I need to cover that? And I gave them 11 questions based on this, and the average score was actually 3.5, and the highest score was 7. Our children are just not interested in this kind of conversion from one to the other. Now, if our top A-level students can't do this, what hope is there for all the other children? So let's get down to business. Why is it that using only metric units is so important for our children's education? Well, if you were to ask 100 people what is the greatest invention of the human mind, you'd get 50, 60, probably different answers. But in truth, the greatest human invention is our decimal number system, the number system that we use every single day. Because without it, we wouldn't have been able to develop almost everything in our modern society. For example, there would be no national grid supplying electricity to every home. So there would be no mains water supply, as this has to be pumped to our homes with electric pumps. There would be no radio, television, computers, internet, CD players, and so on and so on. In previous years, it would have been impossible to design and build canals, railways, factories, roads, aeroplanes, etc. And if you want to understand how brilliant our number system is, try multiplying the Roman numerals CCXLV11 by MCMXXX1V without converting them to our number system first. Well, I'm sure most of you won't even bother to do that, but at least it gives you the idea. But what is it that makes our number system so brilliant? Well, the first thing is we only need the digits 0 to 9 and a decimal point to represent any number we want, no matter how small or how large. The second is that the value of a digit is determined by its place in the number, which is why we often call our number system a place value system. For example, the digit 5 in the number 365 means 5 units. But the digit 5 in the number 358,947 means 50,000. And going down into the decimals, the 5 in the number 7.852 means 500ths, of course. We can change the value of a digit by simply moving it to the left or to the right. And it turns out that this is an extremely useful and important feature of our number system. Because our number system is so flexible, we're able to use it to perform a great number of types of calculation, including addition, subtraction, multiplication and division of all numbers, involving whole numbers, decimals, fractions, negative numbers. In addition, we can calculate squares and cubes, etc., and their inverses, square roots and cube roots. We can find factors and multiples of numbers. But all these techniques have to be learned and understood by our children, and the better their understanding, the greater will be their mathematical, scientific and technological ability. Now here's the thing, and it's a biggie. The metric system is the decimal system with bells and whistles, and those bells and whistles are the units that we use, the kilograms and the litres and the centimetres. So when our children are practicing the metric system, they are also practicing the decimal number system. And when they're practicing the decimal system, they are practicing the metric system. The two are so closely related, it cannot be otherwise. Now, to see this in action, let's take some examples. We weigh an object and it turns out to be, say, 5,673 grams. How many kilograms is this? Well, we know there are 1,000 grams in a kilogram, so we need to divide the number of grams by 1,000. We do this, of course, by shifting all the digits 3 places to the right. Since the decimal point in 5,673 is right at the end, we obtain 5.673 kilograms. Second example, if we see a road sign saying roadworks in 4.5 kilometres, which is actually impossible in this country, we can find the number of metres this is by multiplying by 1,000. That is, moving the digits 3 places to the left, giving 4,500 metres. 3. Mum's height is 1.67 metres. What is that in centimetres? Multiplied by 100, left shifted 2 places, giving 167 centimetres. So now, suppose you want to know what 4.15 multiplied by 300 is. Multiplying by 300 is the same, of course, as multiplying by 3, and then multiplying by 100. So we can multiply 4.15 by 3, giving 12.45. Now, most children can do that in their heads by jotting on paper, assuming, of course, they've done a little bit of work on decimals. Then we can multiply by 100 by left shifting just 2 places, giving 1,245. So the more children practice with the metric system, the more able they are to do sums like 4.15 times 300. And there are thousands of other similar examples. Now, while our children are faffing around with feet and inches, stones and pounds, etc., units which incidentally they don't understand anyway, children in other countries are getting the type of practice that I've just described. So they get further and further ahead, and our children get further and further behind. Sooner or later, these youngsters are youngsters, the future of this country. These people are going to be dealing with units such as newtons, joules, watts, volts, amps, and their multiples and subdivisions, such as milliamps, kilowatts, megajoules. If they're not at home with the simpler metric units and able to manipulate them easily, how on earth are they going to be able to use the more advanced units? Now, I feel quite strongly that this is one of the reasons why our children give up science, particularly science or mathematics and engineering, quite early on, simply because they don't see the relevance of what they're learning at school. What they're learning at school doesn't seem to fit in with what they see in the outside world. They weigh themselves in kilos at school, their parents weigh themselves in stones and pounds, and so on and so on. This means, obviously, they get bored with it all, whereas children in other countries, they see the relevance of what they're learning at school because it's exactly the same when they go into the outside world. Incidentally, it was the same when I was a youngster. I was born in 1947 and grew up in the 50s. We learnt imperial units at school, and we went outside, and there were the imperial units outside. The coalman used to bring coal in hundredweight sacks. I knew 20 hundredweights made a ton. But it's completely different today. Today we live in a metric world, and our children, if they're going to go into technology, science and so on, have to understand the metric system. So they need to see the relevance of what's going on in school when it's applied to what's going on outside. Other children in other countries have a huge advantage over our children simply because we're sticking to these medieval units. You can see how strongly I feel about this, can't you? This is the greatest issue in mathematical education as far as I'm concerned. Now, at this point, I should like to introduce you to Tom. Tom's the son of some good friends of mine, and he's pretty intelligent. For obvious reasons, I don't want to show a photo of him, so this cartoon will have to do, but it's a pretty good representation. When Tom was just 6 years old, I said to him, "Now Tom, you're a big boy, you must weigh about 20 kilos. "I know," he replied, "I'm 3 kilos. Further investigation revealed, of course, that this was actually 3 stones. It transpired that every time he went to a friend's house, he'd go into the bathroom, weigh himself, but their scales were always set to stones and pounds. So now he has to unlearn the weight that he thought he was and relearn his weight in kilos, but he doesn't understand why that is. Then later, when he had a virus, his ears looked pretty red. When I asked him about this, he pointed to one and said, "Oh, this was 100 degrees. And he pointed to the other and he said, "This is 101. Somebody had taken his temperature in degrees Fahrenheit. In a couple of years, he'll be learning that water boils at 100 degrees, only of course it'll be Celsius this time. He could ask himself the question, will his ears be boiling? Now, you can see how easily our children get confused. If Tom is confused at just 6 years old, what's he going to be like by the time he's 7, 8, 9? And he's having to constantly unlearn things where children in other countries are sailing ahead. So please, 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 don't let this happen to your children. Get those medieval units out of your life and focus on the metric, the ones the children are going to be studying at school and the need for their GCSEs and their careers. So here are some things you can do straight away. 1. Change over immediately to metric units in everything you do, and I mean everything possible. For instance, if your bathroom scales are set to stones and pounds, pick them up, switch them to kilos, put them down, and never, never, never go back to stones and pounds. And if you belong to a slimming club, make sure that they do your measurements in kilograms and encourage everyone else to do so too. I haven't used imperial units, except those I can't avoid, such as miles, for over 35 years, so I'm sure you can manage without them too. Number 2, when people offer you goods or services in imperial units, tell them that you don't live in the medieval times and you require your measurements in modern world units, please. Train your children to say, "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about," when they are themselves faced with imperial units. 4, look out for metric units wherever you go and talk about them to your children. And there'll be more about talking about maths in a separate video. Get them to convert from one metric unit to another, for example, kilograms to grams or meters to centimetres. 5, as they get older, point out that the metric system is the number system with units and that practicing one is practicing the other, and that is why it's so important. And if you need a real example of this, try watching the Weighing Your Pet video on the Video Maths website. That should convince you. Now, I'd like to finish by saying that if you do this, your children will immediately have an advantage over other children in their age group. If your child is having confidence problems in mathematics now, and you keep practicing these skills, imagine how they're going to feel when the teacher asks them, how many kilos are there in 1,300 grams? And they're one of the few children in the class who can give the correct answer, 1.3 kilograms. How's that going to make them feel? It's a no-brainer. So please, if you're not already 100% metric, please start today and explain all this to your children and see them soar in their mathematics. Good luck.